Linda didn't know anything was wrong until the third day. The trip had been everything she'd planned. 10 days in Portugal with her sister, the first real vacation in 4 years. The flight home was long, 11 hours, but she slept through most of it and arrived tired in the way that feels earned, the good kind of tired. She unpacked. She slept. She woke up the next morning with her left leg feeling strange in a way she couldn't quite name, heavier than the right, slightly warm, the calf tender when she pressed it. She assumed it was the flight. She assumed it would pass. It did not pass. By day 3, she was in the emergency room. And the word the doctor used changed everything she thought she understood about sitting still. I want to ask you something before we go any further. Think about the last long trip you took, a flight, a long drive, hours in a car or a train or a bus. Think about how your legs felt when you finally stood up. The stiffness, the heaviness, the pins and needles that took a few steps to shake off. Now here is the question most people never ask. What was happening inside your veins during all those hours of stillness? Because here is what the medical community knows, and what almost nobody tells passengers before they board. Sitting still for 2 or more hours triggers a specific, measurable change in the blood moving through your lower legs, and in adults over 60. That change carries a risk that most people dramatically underestimate. Not because they're unhealthy, not because something is wrong with them, because they sat still, because stillness, extended, uninterrupted stillness, is something the vascular system of your lower legs was never designed to tolerate. And the consequences of ignoring that fact can outlast the vacation by months. Linda's left leg was trying to tell her something on that plane. She didn't know the language yet. By the time she learned it, she was already in the emergency room, and the doctor was explaining what had been building silently at 35,000 feet. Linda is 63 years old and lives in North Carolina. She's a retired librarian, active, sharp, someone who walks her neighborhood every morning without fail and has maintained the same general health habits for decades. She is not, by any reasonable definition, someone you would expect to end up in an emergency room 3 days after a vacation. But that's precisely the point. The flight from Lisbon was 11 hours. Linda had an aisle seat, which she'd specifically requested because she knew long flights were hard on her legs. She got up twice, once for the bathroom around hour 4, once to stretch near hour 8. She drank water. She wore her regular shoes. She did, in other words, everything a reasonably careful traveler does. What she didn't do, what almost no one does, because almost no one is told to, was move her legs continuously throughout the flight. Not stand up and sit down, but actively work the muscles of her calves while seated consistently every 30 minutes for the duration of the journey. And that gap between what Linda did and what her vascular system needed was where the problem formed. It formed slowly, invisibly, in the deep veins of her left calf. Blood that should have been moving upward toward her heart began instead to pool, to slow, to thicken slightly in the way that blood does when the muscle pump that keeps it moving stops being asked to work. She felt nothing on the plane. She felt nothing on the drive home from the airport. She felt nothing as she unpacked and went to bed. The body is patient with these things. It gives you time to notice. Linda just didn't know what to look for. Here is what was building inside Linda's leg at 35,000 feet. explained in the way no one explained it to her before she boarded. Your calf muscles are not just muscles, they are pumps. Every time they contract, they squeeze the deep veins of your lower legs and push blood upward against gravity back toward your heart. This mechanism, the calf muscle pump, is responsible for a significant portion of venous return from the lower extremities. Without it, blood doesn't stop moving entirely, but it slows, and in the deep veins, particularly the ones running through the calf, slowing blood under certain conditions can begin to clot. This is called the deep vein thrombosis, DVT, and it is one of the most underestimated risks of long-distance travel in adults over 60. The risk factors are not exotic. They are ordinary: sitting still for 2 or more hours, legs in a fixed, slightly bent position, reduced hydration from recycled cabin air, lower cabin pressure, which affects blood oxygen slightly, the natural reduction in calf muscle pump activity that comes with prolonged sitting. Together, these factors create what hematologists call a hypercoagulable state, conditions in which blood is more likely to form a clot than it would be under normal circumstances. A 2022 review published in the Journal of Thrombosis and Haemostasis found that the risk of DVT doubles for every 2 hours of continuous immobility during long-haul flights, and that adults over 60 have a baseline risk approximately 3 times higher than younger travelers, independent of other health conditions. 3 times higher from sitting still. On a plane, most people consider routine. Linda had been still for approximately 9 of her 11 hours in the air. The emergency room doctor looked at the ultrasound results and then looked at Linda with the specific expression of someone about to say something that will reorganize a person's understanding of what just happened to them. "You have a deep vein thrombosis in your left calf," he said. "A clot. It formed on the flight." Linda stared at him. "From sitting on a plane?" "From sitting on a plane," he confirmed. She thought about the aisle seat she'd specifically requested, the 2 times she'd gotten up, the water she'd drunk. "I thought I was being careful," she said. "You were being careful by the standards most people know," he said. "The standards that actually matter for this are different, and most travelers never hear them. Most travelers never hear them." Linda spent the next several seconds thinking about everyone she knew who had taken long flights. Her sister, who had flown home on the same plane. Her friends, who traveled regularly for work. Her neighbor, who had just returned from a cruise. None of them had heard the standards that actually mattered either. The clot in Linda's calf was caught early, classified as distal, not yet migrated toward the lungs. The doctor explained this distinction carefully, because the distinction between a clot that stays in the calf and one that travels to the lungs is not a small one. Linda was fortunate. The timing of her emergency room visit, day 3, when the leg became warm and tender rather than simply heavy, had kept the conversation manageable. Treatment began immediately. And alongside treatment, the doctor gave Linda something she hadn't expected, a very specific education in what she should have been doing on the plane, and what she needed to do for every long journey afterward. What the doctor told Linda that afternoon is what this part of the video is about, not the treatment for an existing clot, which requires medical supervision, but the specific, evidence-based habits that prevent one from forming in the first place. The first and most important was calf activation, performed every 30 minutes without exception. Not standing up and sitting back down, though that helps. Not walking the aisle, though that also helps. But active, deliberate calf raises while seated. 30 repetitions, both feet. Pressing through the balls of the feet, raising the heels, holding briefly, lowering slowly. This activates the calf muscle pump directly, pushes venous blood upward, and interrupts the pooling that occurs during extended stillness. 30 repetitions, every 30 minutes. The difference between those two things and 2 hours of uninterrupted sitting is, in some cases, the difference between a routine flight and a blood clot. The second was hydration, consistent and deliberate. Not 1 glass at boarding and 1 glass with the meal. Water every hour, actively, throughout the flight. Dehydration concentrates the blood, makes it thicker, more prone to clotting. Adequate hydration is one of the simplest and most overlooked protective factors for in-flight vascular health. The third was compression, worn correctly. Medical-grade graduated compression stockings worn from before boarding until arrival. Not for comfort, for venous pressure. Graduated compression replicates externally what the calf muscle pump does internally. It squeezes the veins from ankle to knee, reducing the diameter of the venous space and preventing blood from pooling in the lower leg. Linda's sister, who had taken the same flight, had worn compression stockings. She had no symptoms. Linda had not worn them. She had not known to. The fourth was position, actively managed. Feet flat on the floor rather than tucked under the seat. Ankles uncrossed. Aisle seat when possible and used, standing briefly every 90 minutes at minimum. Not just for the bathroom, but deliberately, intentionally, as vascular maintenance. 4 habits. All of them simple, none of them instinctive. All of them unknown to Linda before the emergency room on day 3. For your next long journey, flight, train, or car, starting before you board. Compression stockings, medical grade, graduated, worn from before departure until arrival. Talk to your doctor about the right compression level for your situation. Your sister, who wore them on the same flight, had no symptoms. That is not a coincidence. Calf raises every 30 minutes, 30 repetitions, both feet while seated. Set a phone reminder if needed. This is not optional after 60. This is maintenance. Water every hour, not when you're thirsty, because thirst on a plane arrives after dehydration has already begun. 1 glass per hour, throughout the journey. Position matters, feet flat, ankles uncrossed, aisle seat used actively. Stand briefly every 90 minutes. Not for the bathroom, for your veins. 4 habits. Every long journey. Non-negotiable after 60. Linda told me something about the drive home from the emergency room. She said, I kept thinking about all the flights I'd taken before this one. Dozens of them over the years. And I realized I had done exactly the same thing on all of them. Sat still, gotten up twice, thought I was being careful. And I was just lucky. For decades, I was just lucky. Just lucky. That sentence stays with me, not because Linda's story is extreme, but because it isn't. She did what most careful, health-conscious travelers do. She requested an aisle seat. She got up twice. She drank water. She arrived tired and went to bed. And on the 3rd day, she was in an emergency room learning a word she'd heard before but never expected to apply to her. The flight home from Portugal was 11 hours. The recovery, the medication, the monitoring, the compression, the follow-up appointments took months. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because something preventable did. And the difference between preventable and prevented is almost always information that arrives too late. If you've ever landed from a long flight and noticed that your legs felt different than when you boarded, heavier, stiffer, warmer in one spot than the other, that difference is worth paying attention to. Not with fear, with information. Linda had the information now. She would never take another long flight without it. Neither should you. Leave a comment, 2 or 3 words. Tell me about your legs after a long journey. Because someone will read your words today who just booked a flight and doesn't know what Linda didn't know. And your words might be exactly what changes that. Hit the like button if Linda's story reached you, and subscribe to Strong Legs, Independent Life, every Tuesday and Saturday at 11 a.m. Because information that arrives before the emergency room is the only kind that helps. Keep smiling, keep moving, and never forget, you've got this.